Hi, and welcome to EDF Action's Climate Talk. I'm Jeremy Pittman, Director of Grassroots Engagement at EDF Action, and I'm thrilled to be joined today in conversation with Sydney Kesler, a rock star organizer leading the South Carolina Climate Champs in Charleston, South Carolina, as part of the EDF Action Climate Team. We're going to have about 45 minutes of conversation, and if you're watching live and would like to ask questions, you can enter them in the Facebook Live comment space. EDF Action is the advocacy partner of the Environmental Defense Fund. And the EDF Action Climate Team is one of our organizing programs focused on building and visibly demonstrating support in key congressional districts for strong climate action. There are a number of ways you can join us at EDF Action, and we'll try to put them in the text at the bottom of the screen as we go along. I'll go ahead and mention one of the easiest ways, it's already showing there. You can join us by texting EDF Action to 52886. So let's get to it. Again, I'm Jeremy Pittman. I joined EDF Action last year after 20 years working in the movement for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender and queer equality. And I was inspired to move into climate organizing because we're at a critical moment in determining the future of our planet. My focus at EDF Action is on helping EDF and EDF Action members take meaningful action in their communities to build political power for climate action. Sydney, thank you for joining us. Wondering if we could start by having you tell us a bit about yourself and the path you've walked to get to this point.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I had a really interesting path to come into environmental issues, but I've had a history of working in some racial issues and reproductive history and reproductive rights advocacy work. And I've had a great experience at that, but I got into environmental justice work and environmental work because I realized how impacted communities were often left out the conversation. And I wanted to learn about ways in which I could talk about these issues and those that were being hit the hardest about it so that they could have their voice edified and we could find solutions that really impact the communities directly. So that is what has brought me to environmental organizing. I'm excited to be with EDF because I think we are pulling in where power is and building power on the different levels of the structures that we. Yeah. I hope that answers.
Well, that's great. And yeah, it's amazing. And we're thrilled to have you as part of the EDF Action team. Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about organizing and organizing right now. So you're in Charleston. Right. And organizing folks to take action on climate with the South Carolina Climate Champs. What does that work look like right now?
This is a very different time to be organizing, and I think no one could have predicted COVID-19, but it is also really important work right now. It looks like a lot of phone calls, but it looks like having phone calls with people who haven't had people call them in centuries and in a long time. So when you give someone a phone call and they're like, yes, hey, how you doing? It looks like having personal relationships. It looks like having deeper connections. And right now it looks like really people finding ways to be heard and be safe at the same time. And that's something, as an organizing community, as an activist community, as the movements are building, as we see movements become more intersectional, it is an opportunity, I think, for people to really find their voice. Yeah, that is what it looks like right now.
So it sounds like for you, it's a lot of calling EDF members, texting EDF members, making one-on-one connections. And when you do that, I'm interested in two things. What are you hearing? What are folks in the Charleston area saying to you? And then two, what are we asking folks to do? What are the current opportunities for action in this moment?
There are so many opportunities for action, and that is a blessing. But what people are saying is that this action and environmental movement and us being here is finally giving them the outlets to talk about issues they have experienced. And Charleston is below sea level. People are experiencing high levels of flood. Hurricane season is worse than it's ever been for certain people. And you can just feel the effects of climate change. When it rains really bad, people say it smells. So they are talking about the feeling of this pollution, the feelings of how it feels to have grown up here, to be born here, to be bred here, and then to see and to feel the changes as time has come, and to know that this is how we're treating our earth, and this is the causes of those treatments. And so ways in which people can take action right now with us, course, we have the text and down low. But one of the things that I think people are really, really excited about to see happen is they have our online petition. Our online petition is kind of our gateway to introducing. So it's a petition that people can send to their congressman, right? And they're saying, hey, we want to see a climate relief bill. We want to see a COVID relief bill that includes climate change. We want to see these things implemented, and we want to see it happen. And it's like, oh wow, I signed a petition. This feels like stepping into the grounds. We are asking people to then take that petition and share it with their folks, share it with your allies, share it with your community, talk to your neighbors about it, have these kind of conversations. We are asking people to send letters to the editor, right? We're asking them to write your feelings down and get them into the newspaper. Let's make sure that our voices are being heard on the news outlets, that our stories are homegrown, and that we are talking about what we want to see. And people feel a lot of excitement around that. And then we're also asking people, like, let's make some phone calls. Call your congressman. Let them know exactly what you want to see. Let's push for this. Right now we have the momentum. We have the time because a lot of people are sitting at home, and so they're asking for those things. And so those are kind of like the main things that we have right now. But we're asking folks to text your friends. Make sure they're getting involved. We're asking folks, share it on your social media page. Let people know that you're a climate activist, that you're a climate champion, that you're fighting for these issues, and that you're taking a proactive role and fighting for this world that we want to see.
That's great, Sydney. That's a lot to digest, and I want to hone in on a few of those pieces. So first, you mentioned the basic petition that we have up at right now for folks to take action. It generates a message to your member of Congress urging that they consider how to rebuild a better future for everyone when they think about coronavirus relief and recovery funding. And that action is available for anyone to take. Generate a message to your member of Congress right now. You can do that at edfaction.org/climate team, or there's a different link at the bottom of your screen, but edfaction.org/climate team will go to that action as well. So Sydney, you mentioned hurricanes and hurricane season. Charleston's obviously on the coast, and it is hurricanes are a key factor. I know there have been many over the years that have hit Charleston and the Low Country very hard. And I know that you were recently involved in an educational session with some partners in South Carolina around hurricane preparedness. And NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, is predicting an above average Atlantic hurricane season this year. And we had 3 named storms before hurricane season even began. Can you tell us a bit more about the session that you were part of, and what came up as part of that session about hurricane preparedness?
Absolutely. And I want to take this moment to also plug a little bit that we're going to have a copy of that video uploaded onto our social media page, South Carolina Climate Champs. It's our group. So if you're in South Carolina, join that, and you can kind of get the full scale of what has happened. So that's just a little plug, but I would love to give you guys a little bit about what we talked about. So we had some brilliant minds come and share with us kind of like the connection between hurricane season and climate change. So we talked about initially how this is the result of us not doing a good job taking care of our earth, like this season that we're in. And then we moved into what are some preventive ways that we can do right now in our homes to keep this from happening. So some folks talked about how we can board up our windows. We did some real active steps that you can take to prepare for hurricane season. And then we had some folks come and talk about what questions do I need to ask my insurance agents to make sure that I am covered during this season. And so we had a woman come and speak about that as well. And then finally, we said, well, we want to make sure that we're preventing this from happening in the future. So we had someone talk about I talked about the petition and ways that we can advocate for infrastructure that really builds a future of having these issues be prevented and having it so that the generations to come, aren't dealing with these type of seasons and these type of numbers. And if anything, we can just reduce our carbon footprint dramatically. So that is kind of been, that was like a quick synopsis of what we talked about. And it was an awesome experience. A lot of folks from South Carolina, we did it with the South Carolina Inner Faith and Power and Light and the Union Scientists Union. And so it was awesome because we got to really have a unique coalition of people that came together to have a really powerful message that genuinely wanted to talk about the impacts of what was happening on the ground to folks. And that's really what we're trying to do, with this campaign. This campaign is about, from me, from my perspective, this campaign is about finding ways in which these issues that we hear about on a national scale feel close to us, that we can touch it and that we can move it. And so it has been one, figuring out how do we show up, right? This hurricane training was how we show up as an organization, how we show up with partners to make sure that we are helping people prepare, but then also how people can show up as well. So it's about building that relationship, right? It's a give and take relationship. Yeah.
Well, we're going to talk more about relationships, but I know there's a question that's come across the Facebook chat about letters to the editor.
Yes.
You had mentioned the letters to the editor as a tool and as an ask that we're making of advocates around the country. And the question that's come across for us is, are letters to the editor relevant during these new times, with folks not reading physical newspapers as much? In many places, newspaper delivery might not be printed anymore or even delivered. So are letters to the editor still relevant? Why is this an ask that we're making of advocates in the Charleston area and elsewhere?
Yeah. So, I think print news has definitely decreased, and we're not going to even argue about that. But letters to the editor are one, like they're personally ignited. And so their experience of exploring what you feel to get it out there to the world. Two, there are a lot of online publications. A lot of these newspapers have went online, which means when majority of people get their news from online, from social media sharing. So when I write a letter to the editor, I know it's going to be shared on that platform. I know that I'm going to share it to my network, and I know that the organization in which I'm partnering with is going to share it. So in a lot of ways, the impact has grown from just the people who purchase newspapers, which some of these folks are submitting letters to people that purchase newspapers. So that is still an outlet in which it's getting read and which is getting heard. But then you have the online newsletter who's going to share it on their public social media outlets and on their pages and push it on their website. Then you have me, who's going to do the work as the person who wrote the letter to the editor and share it to my personal network. And they're going to share, it's going to grow. And then I have my organization that I identify with. I have EDF, right? My Climate Champions group, and they're going to share with their network. So in a lot of ways, the impact of a letter to an editor has actually developed and grown because of the social media presence.
Yeah, that's amazing. So the social media can magnify it. And one other thing that I think is important to mention about letters to the editor is whether they appear in print or online, they are something that elected officials pay attention to. So when you're thinking about your members of Congress, your state legislators, your city councilors, that's a section of the newspaper, whether it's in print or online, that they or their staff are paying attention to. So that's fantastic. And I see we have a comment from Elizabeth Hauptman responding to this question as well. So that's fantastic. Thank you for that validation around letters to the editor being important. So Sydney, when you talk about the letters to the editor, but about other pieces of advocacy as well, you've talked about the personal story and the connection and connecting personally. Can you share more about what that means? Why is that part of what we're doing here?
So why I think it's important for that to be tied into the work of environmental organizing is because so much of environmental organizing and climate change is starting to connect the dots between the earth and world we live in and who we are as people. And so when we want to start to build deeper connection and community, we have to start to understand how these things impact our daily lives. And a lot of it is personal, right? I need to tell you about why this is important to me, why I have lived in the flood zone for 5 years and that scares me, and why I want my family to be able to live here. I want my generations to be able to live here. I have history here. And that is important because I need you to understand that when we're developing policy. Right? When we are talking about these things, when we are developing and we're talking to our congressmen, we need to personalize this work so that when our congressmen are doing it, they understand that the people behind them are believing in them because they are wholeheartedly invested in it. And when we do the same as organizers, when we wholeheartedly invest in it, we create a community, right, that is extremely powerful. And a lot of it is vulnerability. which is a really scary, right? But when people are open and tell their stories, that level of vulnerability is really powerful. And we want to encourage people to have access to that level of power. And yeah, that is why. Yeah. I hope that answers that
That's
question.
amazing, and I think that yeah, I think that's great. And I think that the whole notion of, connecting to your own personal story about why you care, why does climate change matter to you, whether it's your own community and the
Right,
experiences you're having with flooding or fires or hurricanes or, other
right.
disasters that are becoming more frequent and more severe, or concern for your children or grandchildren, whatever the motivation is that brings you to the realization that we need to do more and more urgently around climate. It's important to share that motivation, because that's what will inspire others, whether they're your family, friends, and neighbors, or your elected officials. So, I think that's just such a great piece of
Yeah,
the
and it's
the
also
work
very,
about
very,
helping people.
yeah, it's very powerful, right? It's very it's moving, right? You said inspirational, but if I can move a person who never thought about climate change, has never uttered those words, but have felt the effects because they can hear my story, I have now gained another person with me that is fighting for this. Right. So it is powerful in that it can pull people into the work. And it is where we have ownership of this work together. And I think that is what brings people to this. That is what makes people organize. That is what makes people want to do this. Is that they feel powerful. They understand what they are able to do. And we want to give. We want to not even give power, because power is not something that you can give, but we want people to be able to harness that power, right, so that we
Mm-hmm.
can get what we need to happen, and to get the legislation that we deserve, and that we're fighting for.
So we'll talk about that in a minute. Legislation that we deserve, what that might look like.
Yeah,
But I know that this year you've been part of trainings to help people learn to share their stories, to learn to write and submit letters to the editor that will get published, to do
absolutely.
this kind of work. But this wasn't exactly what we had planned for these past few months.
Yeah,
I remember the training that we had when we started the climate team, and it was all about planning climate related events in your local community, collecting petition signatures at farmers markets, other in-person activities, and none of those have really been
yeah,
possible since
yeah,
the beginning of March in most places. So
yeah.
now it's a lot more work on the phones, a lot more with digital tools. This is what you described, but what's that been like for you? I mean, it wasn't quite what you
Yeah.
signed up for, but it's the
Yeah.
reality of this moment. How is that?
It's so interesting because I've been asked this question, and my thought process is that I feel like as an organizer, I have been challenged. I want to say that this has been challenging, but I think if I would have never, or if we, right, as a community of organizers, a community, we have never been challenged to think about new ways to contact people, to mobilize people, to make our work more accessible. When we come out of this moment, we will now be able to do this in the streets, right? Because we already knew how to do this, petitioning, how to host events live in person, but we can also do with those that can't come, right? Because what I found is a lot of our South Carolina are elderly folks, right? Who they would have maybe come to a town hall, but petitioning might have been too much work. What I have found is that this makes the work even more intersectional. And so while it has been challenging, while it's a lot of hours on the phone, it is a lot of online events, it is a lot of teaching people how to use Zoom, right? Teaching people how to use technology, and utilizing technology. It has sharpened our tool sets, right? Sharpened our skill set so that we are able to mobilize so much more powerfully, because I believe that we are coming out of this, not maybe not this immediate moment, but that time will come that we can be in person again. That time will come that we as community will be able to meet, and we will be able to do it in a way that is more effective. It'll be more powerful because we have this arsenal that can do both. Um, and so I think that is what I have gained out of this experience. And what it has been like is it has been patience. I have learned patience, right? I have learned patience for technology. I have learned patience for people, because you know we're in a pandemic, in a crisis, and so I might want to do this thing, and I might want to, but then this crisis actually affects my life. And so we've learned patience with our volunteers. We've learned grace, things that we should be practicing anyway. And it's been a really challenging but exciting experience, to say the least.
Well, I love that it's exciting, and I guess we're all up for a good challenge. I see we have some questions about specific ways that people can get involved and thinking about how they can make a difference. So from Lily Duffield, we have a question over Facebook about how can young people get involved who are just getting into the green or environmental movement and don't know where to start. Do you have any thoughts on this to share with folks out there?
Some of my most productive experiences with young folks has been from colleges, and we saw before climate change, we saw what happened with the climate tea rallies and marches, and that has birthed some of the most power. Yes, I want to answer the question, but I want to take this moment to also honor the work that young people have done. In so many ways, this environmental moment and movement has been launched off of their work. In so many ways, they have resurfaced this, and so I just want to say thank you and gratitude to the young people who are powerful enough to find their voice, to ask for these things. And so, what can they do now, right? Like, what is in place for folks to plug in? One, our petition is for all ages, so go sign the petition. Cannot plug that enough for us in South Carolina. Go to EDF Action /climate team, edfaction.org/climate team to do that. But also, letters to the editor from young people is powerful. You can host a meeting. Young people know how to host town halls and meetings with other young people. You can host a live on Instagram and on Facebook talking about these events, but talking about these issues. You can organize. Young people are powerful. This is challenging work, but it is, if you are passionate about it, it is easy enough to do. All you have to do is call people in and ask them to be a part of it. So if you are asking me what can young people do, it's the same thing that any other age can do. And they are doing it. They are actually leading this work, right? Young people are the voice of this work. So I would challenge that to say what we should be asking young people, what else should we be doing in this moment?
That's so great and so true. It is absolutely true that the youth of America, the youth of the world, are leading the climate movement right now, and there's so much that we, as a broader climate community, can learn from the youth and take leadership from them. So I think that's great. A couple of things I'll just point out. I do think that there are a number of groups out there that have youth as a core constituency, as a leadership team, and are really focused on youth. There are a lot of them. You can find them online. One that is a sister organization to EDF Action is Defend Our Future. So folks who are looking for ways to get involved in campus activism or other youth-led activism. There are young people leading the efforts at Defend Our Future, which you can find online at defendourfuture.org. So that's one way that folks can get involved. And then, I also think that there are just I've seen a lot of work over the past few years of young people leading in their own communities, in their own schools, and in their own towns to press for change and to, really move their own institutions, whether it's their school, high school or middle school, to having better climate policies, to adopting, to moving to clean energy use. So those kinds of things can happen at the very local level with just a little bit of bringing people together. So I encourage young folks to think about that as well.
Right.
So, Sydney, there's another question popping up right now from Hannah Frater asking about making a difference at the state and local level to push for climate legislation. And I want to think about that a little bit in the terms of what's happening on the ground in South Carolina too. I know that many folks nationally who may be joining us wouldn't think of South Carolina necessarily as a hotbed of climate activism, but there's a lot going on in the state, from local activism that has led cities to adopt climate plans, to Congressman Joe Cunningham, who represents Charleston and much of coastal South Carolina, who led the efforts in the House last year to ban offshore oil and gas drilling off the Atlantic and Pacific coasts. So can you tell us about some of the groups you've been able to work with, or some of the things that have been inspiring for you on the ground in South Carolina in terms of of local action? Are there things happening in Charleston specifically
Yeah.
or in Columbia? And how do folks get involved in those kinds of activities?
Yeah, so it's so much happening in Charleston in a beautiful way. Charleston is booming around climate issues and environmental issues. Definitely, I do want to uplift the federal level is like the work in which we are doing. And so we're trying to move federal legislation. So if you want to get involved with that, I think I've mentioned some ways. On a state level, I think the Sierra Club Beyond Coal campaign is working on reforming coal campaign. In Charleston, there's the Charleston Climate Coalition, who is a coalition of different organizations in South Carolina, and specifically in Charleston, are working around climate change issues. There's a sustainability office here in Charleston City that you can call and has readily available offering office hours and availability for folks to plug into. And I think those are your state levels and your local levels. And again, you have your South Carolina Interfaith Power and Light. You have your LAMC, which is the Low Country Alliance for Model Communities, and they are our environmental justice organization who is working around equity, economic justice and environmental issues and just the environmental and economic justice, how those overlap. So there are a long list of organizations here in Charleston and in South Carolina that are working specifically around environmental issues. And I think the best way, of course, is you can always, Google those names. Some of the names I dropped down is Sierra Club Beyond Coal, the Climate Coalition here, and then, of course, LAMC, the Low Country Alliance for Model Communities, which is the environmental justice organization. And so those are kind of some of the main ones, but you also have your Audubon, I'm not saying that wrong, but your bird groups. There's a lot of coastal conservation groups. So there are so many groups here that are working to protect this land. There's a lot of groups who are working to protect the land and the culture, because Charleston has a unique culture and history here. And so those are some of the things that I recommend looking into. Hope that.
That's great, and I think it's amazing, and I think that that array of fantastic groups working at the local level in Charleston, there's similar constellations of organizations working just about everywhere around the country. And so there are
Right.
local efforts to plug into just about everywhere. And when we think about local and state efforts, this is going to be a big part of how we get to what we need to get to, which is a carbon-free future, right? And how do we get there?
Right.
There can be federal efforts, but also state and local efforts. And a number of states have already adopted laws that will move their state towards net zero climate pollution by 2050 or earlier. And many of America's largest cities have already adopted similar laws for their own city operations. And so, but more efforts are underway everywhere. And as we think about how all these pieces, go ahead.
And I was going to always say, people ask, well, how does this tie into local level? When we get federal legislation passed, when we get federal bills passed, it makes way for local bills to come through in order to satisfy it, right? Like it opens up the pathway for these things to fall into place, and it gives a requirement for them to happen. So I just wanted to throw that little piece in there. I'm so sorry.
No, that's great. The interplay between what's happening at the local level, the state level, and the federal level is really important. And there's so much happening at all of those places. As we think about the work that we're doing with the EDF Action Climate Team and other organizing programs at EDF Action, a lot of that is, as you suggested, focused on the federal level. We, there is landmark legislation in Congress called the 100% Clean Economy Act, which would set a goal of being at net zero climate pollution nationwide by 2050, and really put in place the policies needed to get there. And just this week, just yesterday, in fact, we saw released the U.S. House of Representatives Select Committee on the Climate Crisis released a report that is the culmination of 18 months of work, exhaustive hearings in Washington and around the country. And they put forward a 500-page plus report that lays out what we should do. This is the most comprehensive plan ever released by Congress to solve the climate crisis, or at least, the American piece of the climate crisis. I know that this is going to be important in Charleston, the work you're doing. Have you
Yeah.
seen any news about this, the traction on this? What's happening with the climate
Yeah,
committee
so
report?
we are, yeah, so one, I think we did a lot of social media, a lot of phone calls, a lot of asking folks to send letters to the editor around this report. Because it's like you said, it's a big deal, right? It's 12 pillars, it's a lot of information that talks about how do we do climate change and how do we do it equitably. And it's really impressive, honestly. And so what we're doing is we're doing a big debrief for folks. And I don't have the link right here in front of me, but we're doing a big debrief on Thursday, 6 p.m. Eastern. And it's a national call. We do national. So I didn't mention this is what we're doing, but we do national team training calls. And basically all of our teams come together from South Carolina, Arizona, Iowa, and Florida, and we just kind of do trainings on activists. But this week we're specializing in debriefing what is actually in this climate report. Like, what does it say? How can it impact us? And so that is our one of our big pushes is that we want people to come and learn about this, get this language, get how this can be impactful, what you can do with this new report, and how it can be impactful in your neighborhood, in your community, and how we're going to use it on a local level. Like, let's strategize together with using this report. And that's going to be Thursday. You can go actually to EDF Action's page, and there's an event that is about it. And let me see if I can. I want to make sure I say the event name correct, but it is the Climate Crisis Report, EDF Action Debrief. And so we're gonna break it down on every level.
And that's, Sydney, that's going to happen tomorrow, Thursday night, July 2nd, but also next week, July 9th, we're going to have a session to talk about the Climate Committee report, and that's going to feature one of our EDF Action government affairs professionals, Carol Andrus, who is a real expert on climate policy. So she's going to break it down in the July 9th edition of this training for everyone about what's in the Climate Committee report and what the future is in Congress for this report.
Awesome. So if you missed Thursday, we got you next Thursday. Awesome.
Fantastic. And I see that we're sharing a link to that event, but you can find those events online through our pages as well. So, Sydney, it's not just, this week is a busy week, so it's not just the House committee report that's out, but the U.S. House of Representatives is set to take a vote on a very big package of activity to rebuild U.S. infrastructure in our transportation systems and to really look forward with ways that we can do some of this rebuilding that builds better for us. And so there's a vote that's going to happen this week on a big package of infrastructure activity for the government in the House. Is that something that you've been working on as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We're trying to generate phone calls. We're trying to generate at least 50 phone calls to our members of Congress here in South Carolina, specifically in the first district, so that congressmen know that this is what we want to see happen, that this bill is something that constituents really care about. So we want to directly have them call the office of your congressman. And I'm in the first district, Joe Cunningham. We want to have them call him, let him know, hey, we are in support of this. We want to see this rebuild better. We want to have this include climate change infrastructure, and we're pushing for this. So we are absolutely doing a lot of work, a lot of mobilizing around those issues. We are having folks do a Twitter storm, right? Tweet out that you want to see this. Tag Joe Cunningham, tag your representative, and let them know, hey, this is what's happening. This vote is coming up, and we want you guys to do it. So we are doing a lot for folks to push and get the word out and just show. We want it to be as visible as possible that here on the ground, this is what we want to happen.
Yeah, and this bill includes a lot of things, but things that affect everyone. Like funding for local governments to electrify the school bus fleets, for example, and to build electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Things that would make our entire electric system more resilient to the effects of climate change over time. So lots of good stuff in this bill that's going to come forward for a House vote this week.
Awesome.
So, Sydney, when we think about the work you're doing in Charleston and how it connects, to everything that's happening, in places around the country. You mentioned that the EDF Action Climate Team is in South Carolina, but also in Arizona and Iowa and Florida. And we have
Yes.
other organizing programs in other states. How does this
Right.
all connect in the big picture in your mind? And, especially now that so many of these activities are, phone from home, join a webinar from home, they're
Right.
less geographic specific. Is there part of that that's
Right.
playing into this?
Yeah. So absolutely. I think so we did the training, and we do trainings, and in our first training we broke out into groups. This is just an example. And we decided we're going to mix up the groups. Usually we break out into groups on these virtual trainings, and you're in South Carolina with South Carolina, Iowa's with Iowa. But we decided to mix it up this time. And when we mixed it up, we found out what I heard back from my volunteers was, oh, I talked to someone who was in Florida and she gave me inspiration because she told me about how she did this, right? And so what we're finding is that it's important for this conversation to be happening for our volunteers on a local level, from each city, each state, from each district, to have these discussions, because we're learning ideas from each other. We're, especially in this time of COVID-19, where information is mostly best communicated virtually. We're taking ideas from each other. We're learning from each other. We're taking it, utilizing it here. So that's important. But also because we found out that we want this, that makes us louder, right? If I know that my brother or sister in South Carolina is struggling, and I'm in Florida, I know my brother and sister in Iowa was struggling, then I feel like as a team, we are a lot stronger and a lot more powerful. And this is something that we can win. So when we start to do these events online, and it's virtual, and you see people from all over the country come together and have these conversations, experiencing extreme conditions as a result of climate change, some similar, some vastly different, that you've never even thought of as issues, you realize how big and how massive it is, and how big and how massive you are, and how powerful you guys are together.
That's amazing. I think that that notion of learning from other people in other places and being inspired is fantastic. And I want to look a little bit at the question of political power and what's happening right now and around voting and voter registration, voting, and the importance of all of these efforts combined for
Right.
our work on climate in particular, and more broadly for for all of the work that people care about. But what do you
Right.
think about voting, registering to vote, and what have you been seeing on the ground in South Carolina? I think you just had the primary elections there recently. We're not going to talk about any candidates,
Yep.
but just talking generally about voting and
Yeah.
registering to vote. What does that look like?
I think right now this is a scary time for voters. I think for longtime voters, for an older voter class, this is a scary time because they've never experienced anything like this. Or maybe we have experienced it, but we're adapting to it. So I think it's a time that a lot of voters are nervous because they feel like this time is changing how we vote, how we engage with the electoral, how we engage with the electoral things. And which is why I think it's so important that people are registering to vote. Young people are registering to vote, that they are getting involved, that older people are finding the ways in which it's safest for them to vote, that they feel safe and comfortable and empowered to vote and to figure out to find their voice and are registered to vote. I think that this time it is so important because this moment is historic. We are living in a historic moment. And in order for us to come out on the other side of history with what we need, um, and that's the reality. We need some things to happen. We need some infrastructures around rebuilding better. We need it. Excuse me. And in order for us to get there, in order for us to get there, we have to invest in who we're going to have in office. Period. In order for us to get there, we have to make sure that we have the folks that are going to fight for us on the ground. So I think that is what's happening, and I think it's this level of fear is not only because of this crisis that we live in, and how am I going to get to vote, but if I can't vote, if my voice isn't heard, what does that mean for my future? Because so much is on the line with this upcoming election. So much.
There's so much there. So I've heard people say that they think their vote doesn't matter because they live in a in a state that's going to vote a different way, or maybe because they're not sure their vote's going to be counted, or or they don't think that there's sufficient difference between candidates to make a difference. What would you say to folks who are concerned that their vote doesn't matter? How would you
Yeah,
address that?
yeah. I want to first, I want to always honor someone's feelings, right? Because there is a history that has led to you feeling that way, right? There has been a moment in which you did not feel powerful in your voting. And so I think that I want to first validate your feeling to whoever it is that feels this way. And then secondly, I always say to people who feel like it doesn't matter, right? Imagine what happens if it did, right? Imagine if it did matter, all of the possibilities that could come from that, right? So if we want to live in a time in which we want to get to a better future, we haven't seen a better future. We haven't lived in that better future. So much of that is imaginary as well. So if we want to get there, we have to do some things we've never done before to get there. And so that is my spiel because I have that conversation often is, you're right. It can often feel that way. It can feel like I am a ant, right? But ants can lift 3 times their weight, right? And there's a gazillion ants in a farm. So, and that's how they build these huge, and not to compare us to ants or, but just, but this is how much power I actually have, and no matter how small someone tries to make me feel, I'm trying to get somewhere we've never been before. So I got to do some things I've never done before. And so if I'm not a voter, I got to go vote, right? And if I'm a typical voter, I got to go advocate for somebody and get other folks to vote for them. So no matter who I am, there's something more that I haven't done before that I got to do now. If I got to get somewhere I've never been before. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I like the comparison to ants. I hadn't really heard that before, and I think that's brilliant. So thank you for sharing that. And just the notion that you can, lift more than your weight, and that's how we're working to build something bigger, right? Like this is a great great way to think of things. So I really appreciate that. So when you think about voting this year, there's been a lot of conversation about changes to voting structure, making it safe for people to vote from home, vote by mail. But there's a lot of change and a lot of uncertainty about what's going to be, how people will vote this November. Will they still go to a polling place and stand in line? Will they be voting by mail? And a lot is unknown at this point.
Right.
But do you have anything that you would say to folks about how to navigate that uncertainty and the sense of question that may arise around their own ability to vote this fall?
Yeah, and if you allow me, I want to specifically talk to the Black community for a moment, and to the minority community, and to the disenfranchised community, and to those often forgotten. The vote has always been stolen from us. It has been robbed. It has been stolen, right? It has never been accessible, and so this is not a new experience. This is not a new fight for voter suppression is real. It has existed for centuries, right? And now in the midst of coronavirus, it has changed the way that it looks. So we must continue to be persistent in this moment to gain access. We must show up for those who do not have access. And what we really must do is make sure that those of us who are most vulnerable in this time of the crisis, those who are most vulnerable in this time of voter infringement, of suppression, are being spoke for and are being allocated for and are being pushed to have access. So if I hate to take up that space, but I just wanted to take a moment to say that. And I think what it looks like as well in this moment, right, is those who have often had access to voting, who has had the privilege of voting, who has had that as a thing that they are just built, and the system is built around making sure they have access to. I think it looks like in this moment, right, for those folks to be advocating for access to be granted. And I think too, I think there's a lot of different things that are considered voter suppression. I think there's a lot of different things that's going to show up that's going to make this a really touchy subject, and people are not knowing what the best way to implement this structure is. And I think the truth is, as a community and as different communities, we have to come together and figure out, okay, how are we going to get this done so as many people as possible can vote, will vote, and have access to that. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I really appreciate that. No, you were spot on, and I really appreciate that. I think that the question of how we address access to voting this fall in these uncertain times is really, really important. And there are a lot of examples from the past few months of voting that's gone well and voting that's gone poorly. And I think we have a lot that we can learn from those. But I think that all of us at EDF Action believe that everyone should have access to voting, and that voting is one of the most powerful things you can do to affect political change, including the change that we need on the climate crisis. So, yeah. So, Sydney, what else is on your mind? What else do you want to share with folks out there as you think about the work you're doing, the folks you're working with in Charleston, the partners that you're working with? Are there other things that you want to share with folks?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think is really important to share is that this moment is so important for us to utilize, so important for us to build power in. And I think most importantly, I want folks to feel comfortable to give me a call, to know that I'm a personal organizer. So if you are in South Carolina, I would love for you to pick up the phone and call me. Give me a moment. I'll put my phone number because I don't know it by heart. Just so I will give you guys my number, but give me a call, right? Feel free to contact us. Feel free to feel like this is a community, because a lot of it is finding new ways to build community with folks. And that is our ultimate goal. So if I can share my phone number, it is 843-564-2689. Again, that is 843-564-2689. And I would love for folks to feel, specifically in South Carolina, feel free to reach out to me so that we can have this conversation. Because, if you want to talk to your aunt or your uncle about what climate change is, that can be a difficult conversation. That can be difficult to navigate, especially in South Carolina, especially when you feel like you've experienced a lot of different environmental issues, but you don't have the language to articulate it, to make it personable, but also connected to science. Call me. That is my job. And so I think that is one of the things that I just want to uplift, is that I am here. And I'm here to connect you to what you're passionate about. So if you want to help fight for this on a national level, let's go. EDF Action is ready. We have something for you to do. If you want to talk more about a local level, great. I can connect you with a little bit more folks that are on a local level, some of our common partners, on how to do that. So yes, that is, I think, my plug and my offering, and know that there's no one that can't be a part of this. There's no one who is inadequate or doesn't have the right. We are for all abilities, right? All ages, all backgrounds, and we are fighting with the core understanding that that the impacted, right? These voices are the ones that need to be heard. So come. There's a place for you here. Come, join, email. Yeah.
Thanks, Sydney. I'm hoping you'll get some contacts from folks in South Carolina who want to work with you. And I'll close us out with just a final question to you about whether you have any holiday weekend plans. It's Independence Day this weekend, the 4th of July. Do you have any plans? I know travel's tough now. Would there be a special meal or a moment of reflection outside? How will you be marking this this holiday?
Independence Day. I don't have any specific plans for the 4th of July. There is a community meeting that I am thinking about attending that I'm excited about, to just kind of learn from some different folks here, to be connected on the ground. But I don't have any specific 4th of July plans this weekend. I wish I did. I wish I did.
I know. I think that's true for a lot of us right now, Sydney, who ordinarily would be thinking about, big backyard barbecues and travel to the beach, and that's just not in the cards for so many people right now. So I can appreciate that and share that with you. But I will close us out now by saying thank you to you, Sydney, for joining us. Sydney Kesler, rock star organizer with South Carolina Climate Champs in Charleston, South Carolina, part of our EDF Action climate team. So thank you, Sydney, for joining us, for spending time with us, and for sharing of your expertise and your wisdom with all of us at the EDF Action team and the folks who were able to join us nationwide. And for those of you who are joining us on Facebook, thank you for joining us for this EDF Action Climate Talk. We really appreciate your attendance and look forward to connecting with you in other ways. Please do join us online. You can join us by taking action at edfaction.org/climate team, or you can join us by texting EDF Action to 52886. And you can join us on our website at edfaction.org. So thank you again for joining us today. We look forward to having you in the EDF Action family going forward, and we'll look forward to future climate talks with you. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.